Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Johns Hopkins School of Education Master in Science Education Policy virtual webinar. My name is Tyreen Maddox, and I am the admissions coordinator at the Johns Hopkins School of Education. Also presenting today, I have my colleague from the Office of Admissions, Sion Jong, who is the Assistant Director of Admissions. Also today presenting is Dr. David Steiner, who is the Director of the Institute of Education Policy. So before we get started, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. First, today's webinar is being recorded. We will be able to share a link with you after the event is complete. So please take a second to see if your mic is on mute right now. Please have your mic on mute and video off at all times during the presentation. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, and we just ask that you type your questions in the chat box and we will read and answer your questions in the order that we receive them. So today's agenda, we will kick off the presentation sharing an overview of the Johns Hopkins School of Education. Then Dr. Steiner will go over the details of the education policy program. Lastly, I'll wrap it up with admissions requirements and leave the floor open for questions at the end. Again, please keep in mind that we ask that you type your questions in the chat box at the end of the presentation. So just to start, some quick facts about Johns Hopkins University School of Education. As you can see, we are one of 9 schools at the Johns Hopkins University. We began offering college courses for teachers in 1909 and then became our own school in 2007. We are proud to share that the Johns Hopkins School of Education is consistently ranked one of the top schools in education by the U.S. News and World Report. For school enrollment, we have approximately 2,367 students enrolled, and we offer 27 programs, which include doctoral, master's, and graduate certificate programs. We also have a strong network of over 22,000 SOE alums. Our presenter today, Dr. Steiner, is the Executive Director of the Johns Hopkins Institute for Education Policy and Professor of Education at the Johns Hopkins School of Education. In 2020, he finished serving as a member of the Maryland State Board of Education and the Maryland Commission for Innovation and Excellence in Education. Dr. Steiner currently serves on the boards of Core Knowledge Foundation and Relay Graduate School of Education. Most recently, he was appointed to the Practitioner Council at the Hoover Institute, Stanford University. He previously served on the Board of Urban Teachers. He also served as a Commissioner of Education for New York State, as the Clara and Larry Silverstein Dean at the Hunter College School of Education, and as Director of Education at the National Endowment for the Arts. So Dr. Steiner, I'd like to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for joining us. Let's go to the next slide. So the first question we might all be asking ourselves is, why do we want to take a course, let alone a degree program in educational policy? What is it? Well, to be frank, 20 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, education policy was not a major field. There were, of course, decisions made by the Department of Education in Washington, D.C., especially around the funding of special needs students or students with learning issues because they didn't speak English as a first language. And there were certain major efforts by the federal government to push states to take responsibility to a greater extent for the performance of their students. But what has happened in the last decade is really an explosion of concern around the relationship between our policies in education, K-12 in particular, and the results that our students are getting, and a deep concern that those results have been flat or declining, and that gaps between poor students, and especially poor students of color, and more affluent students have not only stopped closing, but have widened. And this has led to a real sea change, where once state education agencies and big city departments of education were largely what we would call regulatory agencies, meaning they tried to make sure that people followed the rules. Now we expect those institutions to be reform-minded, to be putting into practice new ideas, better policies to better educate our children. And around them, we've seen an explosion in the number of think tanks, nonprofits that are also focused on this question of how do we provide better education for the students of the United States. So what was once a fairly sleepy field is now very dynamic. And all of these agencies, be they mayor's offices, city departments of education, state departments of education, nonprofits, think tanks, US Department of Education, they are all expected to be active. They are all expected to be pursuing research and evidence-based policies, and they have need, really desperate need, of people who know what these things mean and who know how to read research. Next slide. So the question now is, if this is true, if we have seen all of these institutions really change their roles to being much more active and much more driven to make policy, what kind of skills do those institutions need? What are they looking for in terms of the people that they need to employ? Well, the answer is that those people don't just have one set of skills. They have multiple skills. They have to do a lot of different things and are called on to do a lot of different things. When I was Commissioner of Education in New York State, we won a $700 million grant to help reform education across the 3 million school children in that state. I had about 3,200 people working for me in the department. When I asked myself and my immediate senior team how many of them were ready to really use the funds in ways that were research-based, that involved complex policy development, the answer was almost none. We had to, in fact, hire a whole new team of people with the skills to translate research into policy, to communicate with parents and stakeholders and politicians and district leaders and principals and teachers, to really assess the impact of different policies on different groups of students, to assess when a policy might be good in theory, but was very difficult to actually implement and was therefore likely to fail, to develop communication strategies around different policies for different groups, to evaluate the impact of those policies as they were put in place. All of these skills were rare. It wasn't as if we just could advertise and get a flood of applicants. In fact, it was extremely difficult to build the team that was going to help us implement these reforms. And in fact, the idea of a master's degree that was devoted to the practical practice of education policy really started in my mind way back then, in that need for individuals, for professionals that I couldn't fill. Next slide. So we have built a program, a master's program, that really looks to provide students with real-world research-based skills that are immediately usable in these various work environments. This is for two reasons. One, we believe that a practice-based master's degree should make you employable. Two, we believe in putting together a program that's going to make a real difference in American education. That's why our institute exists here at Johns Hopkins. I direct a team of folks who are working with state leaders, city leaders all over the country to help them make better educational decisions and implement better policies. They are the very people who will hire our graduates from this program. We have made this program, therefore, very, very applicable to busy professionals. While we have a wide range of ages in our first cohort that is fully underway at this point, most of them have a beginning of a professional career under their belts. Some of them have had 5-10 years of professional work or more, some of them 3 or 4. but only one of them is coming straight out of a BA. They are interested in a master's degree that they can take while doing either part-time or full-time work. Therefore, we have put this program online. We have put it not only online, but made it largely, though not completely, I'll come back to that point, asynchronous, meaning that you can complete the work at the hours of the day that best suit your schedule. We have also made this a cohort program, so you follow through with the same group of students, but you may choose whether to take it full-time, in which case it can be completed in basically a calendar year, or part-time, in which case it's a 2-year program. The cost doesn't change, minus a tiny increase for inflation, but the aims that you bring to it are very different. Those doing it full-time really should only be working a very small amount, because doing this coursework full-time is very time-intensive. If you have a full-time job or an almost full-time job, we strongly recommend that you do it over 2 years. The coursework is concentrated. 33 to 36 credits puts it on the shorter side of master's degrees offered by our peer institutions, other very, very strong, internationally renowned universities. We want this to be compact. We want it to be really usable. There is no fluff. Our faculty, myself included, come with backgrounds in education policy. 4 of us are working in the institute that I direct. We interact with policymakers every day. We are not your traditional tweed-jacketed professors of the academy, although we have professorships. We have published, we have doctorates. We have doctorates from some of the world's top universities, but we are interested in making a practical difference. And that separates us from the faculty of more traditional schools of education. We've been in the trenches. Next slide. As I said, we really have designed this program so that if you are totally committed to taking it full time, you can do it in a year. You take 2 courses in the first summer, 3 courses in the fall, spring, and second summer. That's very intense. Or you can elect to do a smaller number of courses and spread it across the year, and then 2 years. I did mention that most of the design is online. This present cohort, the first cohort to go through the program, has experienced only online because of COVID. When we originally designed the masters, we included a full person-to-person, face-to-face intensive week in Washington, D.C., where we bring nationally renowned experts to talk to you about the various aspects of education policy. This time we did exactly that. We had intense seminars, 2 a day, 5 in the morning, 5 in the afternoon, 7 hours a day. We did it remotely. It worked so well that we're now asking ourselves the question of what is lost, right, in not inviting you and having you come to DC in person. Is that more trouble than it's worth? We will be making that decision in the next few months. But one way or the other, you will get exposure to that intense experience of full day instruction for a full week. We give you that week, the dates of that week well in advance so that you can plan accordingly. Plan not to be on holiday, plan to take some time off work during that week. It is compulsory, it is critical, it is your foundation for everything that comes afterwards. Next slide. This is the actual laying out of the coursework. One of the things that we insist on is statistics. Now, don't run for the hills. This is a set of courses taught by someone who's terrific and knows that some of us are math phobic. But very frankly, if you have statistics. You are massively more employable than if you don't. It's one of those skills that separates the person who gets the job from the person who doesn't. If you've had statistics recently, we exempt you from intro to stats, but most of our students in the first cohort, in fact, I think almost every one of our students took introduction to statistics, and everyone takes intermediate statistics in the fall. They're doing that right now. As I mentioned, we also have the introduction to ed policy that includes the intensive Washington week. Then we take you on to federal education policy, a course on diversity, a course on state and local policy, international policy, and education finance. Again, I want to stress that that course on education finance is rare in Masters of Education Policy programs. Why? Because mostly schools of education don't have professors who have that expertise, and they design their masters around their professors' own interests. We design this not around our interests, but around what the market actually wants. And in a mayor's office, in a city department of education, in a state department of education, you better know something about education finance, or again, you're going to be excluded from a whole number of possible jobs. We describe in Outside the Schoolhouse Door all of the outside impacts, the impact of economics and medical care and housing and other kinds of policy on school results. We have a whole course on understanding education research. Again, vital to make you useful. Commissioners of education, superintendents, principals, they don't have time to read education research. They want to know what it says and what they can count on. Then we have a capstone project where you will work under supervision on a longer term project in education, either in your workplace, if your workplace is in education, or researching the literature. I will be running that course. I co-taught the Introduction to Education Policy with a colleague. And finally, if you're interested, we will help to place you in an experiential learning setting. This is optional, but it serves as a kind of opportunity for apprenticeship, for internship, for those who are interested in doing so. So that is the set of programs of courses that make up the degree. And again, the distribution of these courses is to some degree optional. That is to say, you have to do them in 2 years. You can do them in 1. We will offer them again each year so as not to restrict your choices. Next slide. So as a practice-based master's degree, we really held ourselves responsible for some very specific, granular outcomes. I'm not going to read all of the bullets. You can look at them on the screen, but we began the design of this program back to front. What I mean by that is that we started with the skill sets that we know are going to be crucial in this field and crucial to getting you that senior appointment, that strong position in an agency, a think tank, a nonprofit. Then we worked backwards to design the courses so as to deliver that expertise. So we did not start by saying, what is our faculty interested in? Here is what we started with these skill sets. These are the skill sets you will have when you graduate, assuming you get through the program successfully. And this isn't just abstract. So for example, at the bottom bullet, which says compose reports and policy memos, it turns out, and this is a deeper issue around American education, by the way, that the skill of writing well in a compact and condensed way seems to be rare. I'm just going to be frank about it, even among the very, very strong students that we recruit to Johns Hopkins. We have had to do considerable work with our students on policy writing skills, on memo writing skills, on op-ed skills, just on writing skills. We regard it as our responsibility to make sure that you have that set of skills before you leave the program. Some students will be stronger than others in a number of these bullets. We are ready to give extra help where students need extra help in one or more of these domains. Some of you are better writers. Some of you will have more trouble with the statistics. Some of you will just need more introduction to American K-12 education policy than others. We keep the cohort small, below 25 and below, precisely so that we can be attentive to individual needs as they come. Next slide. I talked about this. This is that intensive Washington week. Whether it's going to be in person or online, it means that you have to put aside that 9 to 4 period every day for 5 days. I have to say that on the evaluations, since this already happened earlier this summer, the students were extraordinarily enthusiastic about this experience. They heard from the experts in different domains, right? State leaders who are responsible for making these decisions, people who'd written federal law to change the way America does education, the superintendent in charge of a major city, and what her day looked like and what her reality looked like. This was really a total immersion experience in the world of education policy. Next slide. So I've referred throughout these last 20 minutes or so to the difference between this program and others. I had no interest in designing a copycat program in education policy that had a list of textbooks, right, that you should read and a list of professors to teach you what was in the textbooks. I really wanted a very different kind of program that was up to date, contemporary, supported by knowing the best research wherever it came from, informed by people who were in the kitchen, people who either recently or currently were involved in education policy, people who, if they weren't directly involved in policy, were attuned to the research that was most important to inform policy. So that is what we have done. We have made this really real world and not traditional academic ivory tower. That makes this very different. And of course, it is fully online and will remain online well after COVID because it is designed to be in perpetuity an online degree. So it has nothing to do with COVID. It was designed to be online before we ever heard of COVID, and it will be online when, thank goodness, COVID will be in the rearview mirror. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to hand it back now because we're going to talk about who this program is for, what the admissions requirements are for. But as I want to just stress, I am available for those of you who might have further questions. Please put them in the chat. We will get to them after the conclusion of this presentation.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Steiner. What a wonderful presentation. So here are a few admissions application requirements. The faculty is looking for a 3.0 or better cumulative undergraduate grade point average, completed online application form, and payment of the $80 application fee. All official transcripts from any institutions you've attended for credit. We also require essay/personal statement, resume/CV, 3 letters of recommendation, and the GRE is not required as part of the admissions for this program. For international applicants, we require that you submit a passing IELTS or TOEFL score or testing waiver request form, which can be found in the application. Also required is a course-by-course evaluation of your academic credentials in lieu of transcripts if your degree was earned outside of the US. For more information on international student admissions, you can reference the link below. The MSN policy tuition and fees are as follows. It's $1,300 per credit and $3,900 per 3-credit course. 36 credits, which includes the statistics course, is $46,800. Without statistics is $42,900. Financial aid and scholarships. So about 82% of degree-seeking SOE students borrow graduate loans through federal student aid, complete the FAFSA form each year in planned enrollment form. Applicants are also encouraged to complete FAFSA at the same time as admissions application. As far as institutional scholarships, there are a limited number of partial needs-based scholarships that are available for fall and spring semesters each academic year. The application usually opens up at the beginning of the year around January, and the deadline is April 1. For external scholarship resources, here are a few references: scholarship.com and teacher.org. So at this time, this ends the presentation for our Ed Policy Masters program. We welcome you to ask any questions that you may have. If you could just begin typing them in the chat and we will read and answer.
Yes, I note as you do so, amusing note about fear of statistics. I'm afraid it's pervasive among non-math literate folks who've been afraid of math for years. I would, however, want to do equal opportunity problems. There are no shortage of folks who feel more comfortable in math, but when you ask them to write a 2-page memo on a policy issue, that's just as agonizing for them. So there's certainly enough challenge, enough pain to go around. We certainly ask for a large number of skills to be combined in making you ready for this world of education policy advising. And so there's lots of work for everyone, whether you're a naturally good writer, a naturally good arithmetic person, stats person, research analyst, there's always more to learn.
Thank you, Dr. Steiner. And while we wait for questions, we do get some frequently asked questions here at the Office of Admissions. And the first one is, how long will it take if I choose to take my courses in the program part-time, 2 courses per term?
Yeah, it's basically 2 years. I mean, we can guide you, but we don't want you to spend more than 2 years. That is the design. Just a question about if you've taken stats in the last 5 years, if you got a B or better, no, then you're exempt. There's a particular exemption from that pre-statistics. I think it depends on your own judgment in that case. We certainly don't prohibit you from taking the intro to stats. It's just that you don't have to. In terms of our recommendation, that would depend on basically, did you feel that you learned it? If you had to, pass a little test in intro stats, do you think you could? This is a very personal question, but we're happy to talk to you about it.
The next question I can read, Dr. Steiner. Thank you for the presentation. I love the practical design of the program. And I'm wondering, what have some of the placements for the optional experiential learning courses looked like?
They haven't, because the first cohort hasn't gotten there yet. That's a simple answer, but I'll give you an example. We bring in people to our own institute for periods of some months, and that would be one example. Part of the question depends on whether you need salary support or not. If you do not, that opens up, of course, multiple possibilities of centers in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere. We have a very large Rolodex. Our mailing list for the Institute is about 3,400 individuals in education policy. When we get to know you through your coursework, we can then begin to match your talents with who we know and where we know them. So I'm not at all worried about placing. If you need salary, that of course becomes more difficult, but we can talk about that and give you advice and placement.
Sounds good. Sounds like a great experience as well. The next question is, does the SOE offer merit-based scholarship opportunities in addition to the needs-based? If so, are there any important factors So that's a question for admissions. Unfortunately, we do not offer any additional merit-based scholarship opportunities, just the needs-based scholarship that was explained during the presentation.
Okay, the next one is on whether it will be useful internationally. There is, and in my presentation, I moved too quickly, but one of the courses is devoted to international education. You can't obviously dig in depth into a particular country or countries in one course. We look at, for example, a lot of the research out of the PISA organization, the OECD, which tabulates international results and best practices. So there certainly is exposure to international education, but it is, I would say, of necessity, not as deep, obviously, as the exposure to education in the United States. I did mention that it's essentially an asynchronous program. You may have missed that at the very beginning because it was early. Only the intensive Washington, D.C. experience is synchronous if it remains online, but of course it would be synchronous if it were in person. So that week is synchronous. Otherwise, the courses are asynchronous, usually with the exception of a gathering at the beginning and the end of the course. We encourage our instructors to do that so that people can touch base, see each other, meet the instructor. But other than that, it's asynchronous. There was a question about 2.9 is not an automatic disqualification. Even 2.8, we want to see the whole person. We want to see what the experience was. For example, some students come to maturity later, and if we see that the coursework at the end of the undergraduate transcript is stronger than the beginning, that's one thing we can take into account. Graduate work is another, letters of recommendation, life experience, right? If you have a 2.2, no, that's just not going to happen. But if you just missed a 3, no, that's not an automatic exclusion by any means. The letters of recommendation do not have to be academic, though we would strongly urge that at least one be so. We do need to know that you can do academic coursework. And so one letter is, very usefully could be academic. Do students go to this program directly from undergrad? 1 or 2 in our first cohort did so. I think it's not that we actively discourage it. It's that, some work experience does have 2 advantages. 1, you're just more mature. 2, if it's in education, obviously that helps. A number of our students are teachers and are looking to make a career change, but clearly they know something about K-12 education, and that's an advantage. Will graduation from the program be online? Not if Hopkins is back to in-person graduation. The current cohort is 18. It started at 21, and we lost a couple during the stats course, to be very frank. It sounds real world. The stats course also real world, basically. So the stats course has to be both real world and stats. So where the examples can be drawn from education, they are. There are just some statistical principles and operations you have to know, right? You need to understand what a regression analysis is and how to create one, and what the p-values are and what a confidence coefficient is. That's just true. You cannot not know that and just infer it from your educational readings, but wherever possible, the statistics will be contextualized. I think that's all the questions that we have right now.
Yeah, I think so. We answered this early on the presentation, but how big is this year's cohort? You said 25, is that correct?
I said, no, I just said 17 that we
17, okay.
lost a few from the stats course. I just mentioned that.
Got it. I think we are good to go.
Wonderful. I do have another frequently asked question, which is, what is the required residency for this program? So if I live outside the US and not able to travel to DC, would I still be able to watch the orientation residency?
Yeah, I mean, we to be honest, this is one of the reasons why we may continue to do the DC week online. We know it's expensive for people to come. And the problem is that if we exempt someone because they're abroad, what if they are in Hawaii, right? Should they get exempt? Because it's a long way from Hawaii to DC. So once we start opening up that possibility, it gets very arbitrary who gets permission to be online. And of course, they're not really part of the experience in the sense if everyone else is sitting around the table, it's very hard to include them, however hard you try. So originally the idea was, no, this was compulsory to be in person in DC, but the very fact that it is a challenge for those who are abroad, obviously an impossible challenge during parts of the COVID outbreak, but a difficult challenge even in the normal course of events, may suggest to us that we continue to have it online. We'll, as I said in my presentation, we'll make that decision in the next couple of months. What is the form of asynchronous courses? Multiple. Yes, there are recorded lectures. Yes, there are also videos. There are readings. There are active discussion boards that the professors take part in and intervene in. So it's not, it's multiple modalities is the answer to that. Multiple formats. We know that it has to be as engaging and various and alive as it can be. We very much try to avoid the, read page 16 to 92 and summarize it kind of asynchronous. There, of course, there is reading, but that reading is turned into discussions and papers and is informed by lectures and by video and other formats.
All right. And the next question is, Dr. Steiner, when is the next start term and when is the application due? And the application due date I can answer is April 15, 2022. And then this is a day where all your supporting materials, for example, like your letters of recommendation and official transcripts are due.
Right. And the coursework, if you're taking the intro to stats, starts in July. I should get the exact date. I don't have it in my head if it's late June, early July, but it is the summer. That's when the very first course is that intro to statistics. The second course is the Washington DC, is the course that has the DC experience in it. The week of that experience was August 9th through 13th. Actually 8th through 13th this year. So obviously it took place. We would, again, alert you to the date of that intensive experience well in advance, because even if it's online, you have to be available every day, all day for that experience. But we will get you the exact starting dates very soon.
Okay. If you submit the application early, when can you accept an acceptance letter?
I mean, I think, to be honest, it depends on the application. I'm just being very frank here. If you are clearly an extremely strong student, somebody who we just could not see turning down based on the combination of your transcript, your letters, your personal statement, we can turn that around fairly quickly. And there's no reason to wait. If the application suggests that it's sort of one of many that we will see that will require difficult judgments, then we will hold on to it until we have more applicants to compare it to.
Okay, looks like there's one other question. Is there an average amount of aid met by the university for master's students? As a working EDU professional, I feel slightly obsessed with how I go about paying financial master's programs. Rima, that's probably a direct question for our financial aid department. Unfortunately, we don't have those statistics and/or numbers, but if you want to type in your email in the chat, send to me directly, Tyreen Maddox, I can try to get that information for you and follow up.
Right. The other thing I would say is it's a moving target. The Dean of the School of Education, Chris Morphew, who's an enthusiastic supporter of the program, is trying to increase the amount of financial aid that would be made available. It is on the modest side right now, as I understand it, but our hope is that it will be increased. So I can't promise anything, but certainly the financial aid can give you the data for what was this year, and we hope it'll be higher next year. Any other questions? Do I think we'll change any of the coursework? Oh yeah, sure. Nothing is built in stone. The advantage of having things online is you can change them. We certainly, we're open. That's why we listen to feedback. That's why we get feedback, is so we can make this better. I think the stats demographics can't go into details with such a small cohort. I would just say that, as so often in education, it's female heavy. That's just not unusual. I would say that the majority of the students have some experience in education, but not all. So the majority of them have been teachers, but we have a couple from industry who are just interested in education, one from technology. So it's varied. And we have a couple of students who are internationally based. They're not in the United States. Capstone, well, the difference is that if you are in an educational setting, like a school or an office of some kind as part of an organization that is already doing education, then we would encourage the research to be based on your context, although it might well need to be informed by some readings as well. If you're not in an educational setting, then clearly the work has to be more academic, in the sense that you can't draw on your immediate surroundings. But in either case, the topic needs to be in education. So, great. Well, thank you, everyone. Don't hesitate to be in touch with the admissions office or with me or with financial aid. I hope that the presentation has piqued your interest and that you will consider applying, and look forward to welcoming you, some of you at least, into the program next year. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you all so much. And if you guys had some additional questions, Dr. Steiner has left his email there for you to follow up. Otherwise, we are more than happy to assist you with the admissions process as you elect to apply for this program. Thank you guys so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.